but he is the name everybody thinks of. He's the name that people, they write about. George Whitefield. So let me show you what was involved for Whitefield to be involved in this revival. For Whitefield to be involved, back up. He preached 18,000 sermons over a 34-year period of time. His involvement in the Great Awakening lasted for 34 years. He preached 18,000 sermons in that period of time. That is a bunch of stuff. That's 500 meetings a year that he's holding to be able to have the revival that we had. And it took a long time for it to have the effect that he wanted. So that's a lot of work that's involved. In addition to that, you'll find that he had a lot of travel on horseback. He made 7 journeys from Maine to Georgia and back to Maine. Do that on horseback. And by the way, he carried his own portable pulpit with him on his horse. And so he would stop in a town, get out and have a community meeting, put his pulpit out and get up on that. That's his actual pulpit that he had. So for 34 years, I'm a cowboy. I ride horses all the time, but I've never rode a horse for 34 years. And I've never had to ride it in all the weather he went through. And I've never had to ride it from Maine to Georgia and back 7 times. And that's what he did. And I would say that there's a lot of hard work involved in that. There's not a lot of glorification that goes with that kind of a lifestyle to have to do what he did. So that's part of the Great Awakening that he's involved with. And again, without that, we don't have the American Revolution. But in addition to that, he faced a ton of opposition. And the opposition usually came from within the religious community. The people that should have been supporting him were the people that were shooting at him the most. Now, this is not surprising. I've been involved in politics a long time, been involved in church a long time. And I think the axiom that I like using is the axiom that goes with Moses. Oops, excuse me. How about that? I'll set that over here on the side, excuse me. Moses only had to fight the Egyptians once. He fought his own people for 40 years. And that's the story of Moses. I have learned that in both church and in politics, you have to wear a bulletproof vest, but you always have to wear it to the back, because it's a friendly fire to get you. The axiom that I developed in politics a long time ago is, I don't need enemies, I've got friends. And they do more to me than my enemies do. As a matter of fact, I've got a friend in Arkansas who jokes about the fact that, when Noah was out there in the ark and they were going through the floods and the storms, he was never at all concerned about what was on the outside of the ark. What got him was all the woodpeckers on the inside of the ark. And that's very often what happens is your opposition are the people that should be your allies. And so you have to deal with the psychological side of, man, I'm having to fight my own people. I'm having to fight Republicans, not just Democrats. And so as conservatives, that's what we all have to do. There's nothing unusual about that. I mean, Jesus had to fight the religious leaders all the time. He's trying to fix things really good, and it's the religious leaders who fought him. So you learn that so much of the opposition comes from within the religious community, which is, or the political community, or whatever it is that you're trying to affect and change. You want to help education, it's going to be the educrats that will fight you all the way around. You want to get government working right, it'll be all the government people that fight. Whatever it is, you're going to find the opposition comes from within. So what's striking is about all that 80% of Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, how many communities do you have to be in for 80% of Americans physically to have attended a meeting where you spoke? You consider that back then on horseback, he was in every conceivable community you could think of. 80% of Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, see, what you'll find out of this is that what you get from this is there's a whole lot of hard work involved in this. That is not a glorious lifestyle. As a matter of fact, he was not inspired by what he was doing. It killed him. What he did killed him. The last 2 years of his life as he would preach, he'd crawl up in that pulpit, preach, and he'd get out of it, he'd go over, he'd spit up and cough up a bunch of blood, throw up his guts, get on his horse and ride to the next town. It was not fun what he was doing. But had he not done it, we would not have America as it exists today. So what you find is that this is something that's characterized not by inspiration. You don't get inspired to do this. You have to have a lot of hard work. You have to be dedicated to this over a period of time. For him, it was 34 years of his life until he died in 1770 in Newburyport, Massachusetts. So the first principle that goes with any kind of American revival, renewing the culture, is there's a whole lot of hard work. The second principle that goes is that it requires a sense of duty. The word duty does not mean today what it used to mean. At the time of the Founding Fathers, the original American Dictionary by Noah Webster said that duty was a legally binding contractual obligation. In 1913, the dictionaries changed the definition of duty to be responsibility. And today, the word duty means that which one ought to do. Well, there's a ton of difference between what you ought to do and a legally binding contractual obligation. I built homes in Texas for a number of years. In that period of time, as I built homes, I went through hundreds of thousands of dollars of money from the bank. I would, get the money from the bank, the loan from the bank, I'd build a house, or would sell the house, give the money back to the bank. And I made, I can't tell you how many 6- and 7-digit transactions we made in selling houses. I never once signed a piece of paper with my bank at all. In all the years I built houses, never once did it. Because I shook hands with the banker, we made a commitment. That was a legally binding contractual obligation. I had a duty to pay back what I had borrowed from him. He had a duty to loan me the things I needed to build the house. We'd never used paper. See, it wasn't what we ought to do. It was a legally binding contractual obligation. That's the sense of duty you need to have in your mind as we talk about the next things coming forward. As you look at duty, I want to start with the miracles of Jesus. You say, how did you get from, I'm going to show you how this works. There's a connection with this. On the miracles of Jesus, remember so many of the miracles he had, whether it was walking on the water, whether it was calming the storm. There were disciples said, wow, he's even got control over the weather. Whether it was feeding the multitudes, taking just a handful of loaves and fishes and feeding thousands. Whether it was healing the blind, or whether it was healing the sick, the lame, whether it was raising the dead. All this stuff happening. Disciples have been with him all this period of time, and then somebody says, hey, would you heal my son? They said, got it. We've been around this guy for years. We know how this works. Except they couldn't do it. And so Jesus was away at the time. They'd been asked to intervene. They tried. Everything they did failed. And when Jesus got back, they had a discussion with Jesus about this. And the disciples specifically asked him, Luke 17, the disciples went to Jesus and said, increase our faith. I mean, this guy asked for our help. We couldn't do it. We see you do this all the time, so it's got to be our faith. Help increase our faith so that we can get this stuff done when people need help. Great request. Now, you've got the context, what had happened. You've got the question they asked. Look at how Jesus responds. They said, increase our faith. Jesus answered and replied, suppose one of you had a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Now, how did you go from faith to agriculture? It's a weird jump that he's taken. Increase our faith. Let me tell you some stories about agriculture. This happens to be something that I'm very familiar with. If you take the plowing aspect of this, my dad and granddad, as they were growing up, they were in the middle of World War II, all the rationing that went on, they went back to plowing with mules. They went back to not being able to use the tractor because of gasoline and everything that was going on. So they're back to plowing with mules. And even at that time, as we were plowing, we still had metal tips on the plow. You back up to the time of Jesus when you got wooden plows, no metal tips on the plows. Number one, it is really tough work to be all day long walking behind mules or oxen with them pulling that through the ground. Every time you hit a rock or stump and bust, you got to stop, you got to repair. That is not a fun lifestyle to have to do. He says, suppose one of you was plowing or looking after sheep. As hard as plowing is on hand and on foot with wooden tools like they had, taking care of sheep is even a lot harder. For a lot of folks in the church, they think, oh, isn't that neat that Jesus says he's a shepherd, we're the sheep? No, that's not neat at all. That is one of the greatest insults that's ever been delivered in the history of the world. It is not a cool thing that we're like a sheep. That is one of the greatest insults that's ever existed. I raise sheep. If I'm going to do anything with sheep, I have to use psychological warfare on a regular basis. They are stubborn, they are rebellious, they are selfish, they are self-willed. If I want them to stay in the pen, I try to chase them out of the pen, and then they'll stay in the pen. Whatever they do, I have to do the opposite. If I try to feed them, they will hit and knock the feed out of my hand. They'll scatter everywhere where they can't eat any of it. If I try to doctor them, they will run. I have all sorts of broken bones from trying to doctor sheep that needed help. I go in to help them, and they're going to try to kill me for helping them. Everything is wrong about sheep. Now, what it does say, it says something a whole lot about the shepherd. I mean, that's a real compliment. If you can handle that kind of nonsense that those sheep put on you, then you're really significant. So when he says, suppose one of you had a flock of sheep, and by the way, in the country, you guys up here, you can't use the same accents we use because your sunlight goes 21 hours a day at times. Well, for us, in the South and Texas and the Southwest, we say we go from can see to can't see. That'd be really tough for you guys at certain times of the year. But generally that runs into about 14-hour days for us. So we're working about 14 hours a day. We turn in when we can't see. We get up when we can see. So you're working 14 hours a day with a herd of sheep, the dumbest animal that is in God's creation. And at the end of that day, you're really glad to be away from the sheep. You put them in the pen or you bedded them down or whatever it's going to be. So Jesus says, when he comes in the field, so you've been plowing all day, hard work. You've been taking care of sheep for 14, 16 hours, really hard work. You come in from the field, how do you feel? When you come in from the field, what do you say to the servant? Come along now, sit down. Boy, have you had a hard day. I can't believe you put up those sheep all day long and then having to follow those oxen, those mules. That's not what happens. When you do all this stuff all day long and you have exhausted yourself and you come in and you're ready for a little sympathy, you're ready for a little understanding, you get in, and does the master say to the servant, oh man, it's been hard for you, come on, sit down and have something to eat? Jesus says no. Would he rather not say, prepare my supper? You get yourself ready, you wait on me while I eat and drink, and then maybe we'll get around to you after that. So now the guy finds out he's got a double job. Not only does he have to work his tail off agriculturally during the day, but when he gets in at night, he can't even take care of his own needs. Now he's got to take care of the master's needs, and after all that's done, maybe he gets around to having something himself. So his whole life is built around everything else and everyone else. He doesn't get any of the time that he wants or he would enjoy. And that's interesting that Jesus would do this. He said, would he thank the servant because he did what he was told to? In other words, after the servants made all the sacrifice, does he get thanked by the master for doing this? And the answer is no. So also, when you've done everything you were told to do, now see, remember what's happened here. The disciples said, increase our faith. And he says, let me tell you about how life is in the agricultural community. And you never get thanks, you never get appreciated. People don't notice what you do. You're going to have to do more than you ever planned on having to do. It's going to be non-ending demands on your time. He says, so also, when you've done everything you were told to do, you should say, we're unworthy servants, we've only done our duty. Now, there's that word duty. It's interesting because do you remember the question? The question was, Lord, increase our faith. And Jesus says, increase your faith, you got to learn to do your duty. So what happens is, Jesus puts spiritual maturity, increasing of faith, back on this kind of behavior. And back then, that word was a legally binding contractual obligation. If you want to increase your faith, you're going to have to learn to do the things you don't want to do, the things that are unappreciated, the things that nobody will appreciate you for. Matter of fact, the things that they'll demand more of you, the more you do, the more they want of you. He says, once you learn to do that and not be appreciated, then we can talk about increasing your faith because that's the basis of it. So it's interesting that word duty that he uses there. That's that word that, again, the Founding Fathers used so often throughout what they did. As a matter of fact, Founding Fathers really lived that duty in a way that we rarely think of. Someone, John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, when he's 8 years old, has his musket out with the Massachusetts Minutemen going after him. When he's 11 years old, 14 years old, and 15 years old, he gets congressional diplomatic appointments overseas. At that age, at 11, 14, and 15, when he was 21 years old, George Washington said he is the most able foreign diplomat that we have. He went on to a career in the diplomatic field. He served in 5 different nations. He was a diplomat under several presidents. He was also a U.S. Senator under President Thomas Jefferson. After becoming a U.S. Senator, he becomes Secretary of State under James Monroe, and then he becomes the 6th President of the United States. Then after he finished his term as President, he next went into the House of Representatives. He's the only man to go from being a president to being a member of the House. And by the way, he said that was a promotion. He went from being president of the House. He said that was a promotion. He's in the House. And over the next 17 years until he died in the House, he spent more than 70 years in public life and public service, very unappreciated, very banged on. People just abused him. The campaign ads, the accusations against him, pretty intense. But for 70 years, he served America. And he says, remember the House of Representatives? It's interesting. He went in as a one-issue guy. His one issue is, I hate slavery. I want no union with slaveholders. We're going to end slavery in America. At that point, we've had slavery in America more than 200 years. And he's going to end it by himself. Well, that's his intent. He's going in there. He's going to do everything he can to get the culture changed, have a revival, if you will, to get back to where we should have been. That's the principles of liberty rather than the principles of bondage. And so that's what he works to do. His nickname became the Hellhound of Abolition. He put his teeth in that and would not let go. That was the issue that defined his life, quite frankly. And it defined a lot of what he did. He's one of the few Founding Fathers who actually lived long enough to have a photograph made of him. But this is a photograph not long before he died in the House of Representatives. He died on the floor of the House of Representatives, conducting business on the floor. And so 17 years he's in the House, and across that time, that was the issue he would not let go of. He is the guy who actually argued the Amistad case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. If you've ever seen the movie Amistad, he argued, he was anti-slavery in front of a court. that only 2 of its members did not own slaves, and only one of them was anti-slavery. He argued a case in front of that court and won. Quite frankly, it's a remarkable argument. He did a brilliant guy. He also is the man that is a House member. He filibustered and kept the state of Texas from becoming a state in the United States. And back then, the filibuster was in the House. It was not in the Senate. There was no such cloture rule. The Founding Fathers adamantly opposed the cloture rule that we have now. If you were going to filibuster, you had to do Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You can stand there, and as long as you can talk, and as long as you can survive, you can do it. But none of this stuff where you send a note to the majority leader, minority leader says, yeah, I think I'm going to filibuster. No, we didn't have that. The Founding Fathers said the fundamental principle of the Constitution requires that the will of the majority shall prevail. That's why they did not allow the cloture rule in the Senate at all. That was added in 1972. And today we hear Speaker McConnell say, oh, we have to protect the traditions of the Senate. That's not a tradition. That's a 1972 thing. How about we protect the Constitution? That's a much better tradition. But we don't have that, and not enough people even know about that, know how it works to be able to voice off on it. But nonetheless, this was his issue. He would not let go. And week after week, the First Amendment says you have a right to petition government for a redress of grievances. He's a huge petition guy. And it seemed like every week, every few weeks, he came in with another handful of petitions to the House of Representatives. There's one week he came in with over 900 petitions, and all these petitions from all these people who want slavery, and this is out of the records of Congress. The problem he said he had was that when he got to the House, 80% of the House was pro-slavery. He said that all of them liked slavery, but 80% of them did not want to deal with moral issues like slavery. They wanted to deal with economic issues. And so he's in a situation where 80% is to vote against him on a regular basis. He does not have the support he needs, and he keeps chipping away, and every week, he comes in and has these 900 petitions, and back then in that day, government was so responsive that when a petition came in, they would take the petition, refer it to the committee would have a hearing, report back. You know, if my congressman was Joe Johnson, whoever, and I wrote on the back of a napkin that I petitioned government to pass a law on this, he would actually pass that on the committee. They'd have a hearing on it. They were that responsive. So when Congress gets 900 petitions saying we want slavery, and 80% of them are anti-slavery, this is not what they want at all. So they did then exactly what we still do today, and that is they went to the Rules Committee of the U.S. House. They got a new rule passed in the House, and that new rule said you can introduce any petition you want, just so long as it's not an anti-slavery petition. It was called the John Quincy Adams gag order. They passed it to shut him up. And it didn't work out too well. He kept speaking. Week after week, he'd come back with it again and again. They tried censure, they tried reprimand, they tried expulsion. Matter of fact, there's actually political campaign cartoons from back in the day. It has a picture of John Quincy Adams with a bullseye on his forehead saying, kill this man, get him out of Congress. So we talk about negative campaigning today, we're a bunch of wimps. You know, see what they did back there at that point in time. And so you got all this going on, and he's done this for years, and they have this gag order in place. He's not even allowed to talk about it. And after this had gone on for years, it's like, my gosh, you're not getting anything done. You know, you keep getting set up here, but you're a dismal failure. You can't get any bill passed because they're all opposed to you. Your issue is slavery, but they're so ticked at you over that they won't even consider your other bills. They're just shutting you out. And so interview, he says, you know, you've been doing this for years, and quite frankly, you've been signally unsuccessful for your district. You're not getting anything done for them back home because they've all shut you out up here. They've tuned you out. And yet you keep doing this. Don't you get frustrated? Don't you get depressed? And he said, no. And they said, why? Here was his answer. He said, because duty is ours. He said, results are God's. I don't do this because of how it turns out. I do it because it's the right thing to do. And I really don't care how it turns out because all I'm responsible for doing is the right thing. And I'm just going to keep doing that as long as I'm alive. Well, he kept doing that, and actually it's interesting that he eventually converted enough House members to his position so that they eventually repealed that gag order. When they did, they presented him with an ivory cane gold band around it. That gold band around it actually has his name on it the date that they repealed the gag order, because now he's individually, over 10 years, converted enough of those guys to his position. He got the House all switched around, and in his diary, it's really funny, you know, because he does all this because it's the right thing to do. But in his diary, he has his entry, says, God forgive me. But I really enjoyed getting that cane. You know, I didn't do it for the win, but I enjoy having the win occasionally. And so John Quincy Adams is the epitome of duty. And that's what it took to change the slave culture of the time that was deeply embedded. This is the middle of the Second Great Awakening as well, by the way. Lorenzo Down, Charles Finney, all these other guys preaching about this and against slavery. So there's a lot there with it. You also have all these quotes by the Founding Fathers that if you think about the right definition of duty, not the way we take it today, that which one ought to do, but a legally binding contractual obligation, actually following through and doing the things we're supposed to do. Here's what Sam Adams said. He said, the man who is conscientiously doing his duty will ever be protected by that righteous and all-powerful being. When he's finished his work, he'll receive an ample reward. The guys that get rewarded, and God keeps score, you know, we may lose every battle down here, but if we've done what we're supposed to, if we've done our duty, he keeps score, we get rewarded by him at the end, because that's what matters, is how we get rewarded by him. You have the same from John Hancock. John Hancock said, in having secured the approval of our hearts by a faithful and unwearied discharge of our duty to our country, no matter how much they oppose you, no matter how much they fight you, no matter how much they disagree with what you do, he said, if you will do that, let us joyfully leave our concerns in the hands of him who raises up and pulls down the empires and kingdom of the world as he pleases. We just do it, let him worry with the results. The fact that it doesn't work out doesn't mean we stop trying and that we don't hang in there. He continued, John Jay, the original Chief Justice, U.S. Supreme Court, one of the three men most responsible for the Constitution we have today, said it this way. He says, all that the best men can do is persevere in doing their duty to their country and leave the consequence to him who made it their duty. That's the John Quincy Adams thing again. He says, be neither elated by success, however great, nor discouraged by disappointment, however frequent, mortifying. In other words, if you just do what's right, you don't have the ups and downs of getting depressed because nobody agrees with me and I can't get anything passed. And you don't have the ups of, oh, I got it passed, and the next time they don't pass, you don't have the emotional ups and downs. You just do what's right, and you can hang in there as long as you need because you're not after the results, you're after doing what's right. He said, we must go home to be happy, and our home is not in this world. Here, we have nothing to do but our duty, and by it to regulate our businesses and our pleasures. It may not be real enjoyable here trying to reform a culture, but that's not the issue. We get to be happy when we go home, and that ain't here. But until then, all we do is regulate ourselves by our duty. So this is the emphasis, the push they had on it. You have John Witherspoon signing the Declaration, said the sum of the whole is the blessing of God is only to be looked for in those who are not wanting in the discharge of their duty. These guys, duty. That's why so many of them died as a result of signing the Declaration. 10 of them never lived to see the freedom they wanted. 17 of them lost all of their estates, all their fortune. 3 of them lost their wives. 2 of them lost their kids. 5 of them made prisoners of war. 3 of them were wounded in war. It was their duty. They had to go out and, as they said, our lives, fortune, sacred honor. We don't care if we lose everything. This is the right thing to do. When you get that mentality going, you can reform a culture. It'll take time. But if you're relentless, and if you're not the first one to give up, if you make the other side give in before you do, then that's how you win these things. And that's cultural things. Again, they transcend generations. They transcend decades. That's what George Whitefield did. He did not do what he did because it was inspiring and because it was fun. Because it was not fun. It was his duty. And he hung in there and did his duty. And as a result, we have a nation now that we would not have had Whitefield not done what he had done. So the second requires a strong sense of duty. The third point is that you have to have a willingness to stand alone. Because there's a lot of times people look at you and say, you're crazy. I don't want people making fun of me. Like, have you seen what they've been writing about you? Have you read the blogs? See, in my case, there are Soros pays guys who write blogs about me on a regular basis. First time I got a call from U.S. News and World Report that asked me this question, said, did you know the ACLU just spent $1 million on you to discredit you? Wow. No, but that's great because that's $1 million they can't spend on the school districts. Once you start getting attacked and your friends start backing away from you and say, he's a little strange, what happens? You have to have a willingness to stand alone. Let me give you some examples out of American history. This guy's Elijah Lovejoy. We don't get talk much about him anymore. Elijah Lovejoy became a Christian. He became a believer. As he looked at the condition of the nation, this is the 1830s, he's looking at the condition of the nation. The moral issue of the day is slavery. He's got to take a stand on the moral issues of the day. The Declaration is very clear. All men are created equal. They're endowed by the Creator with liberty, real simple, plus the Bible, whether it be Luke 4, all these other passages, real simple, and liberty. God wants liberty. So he started expressing his views by becoming a newspaper guy. He became a newspaper guy. He bought a press. He ran a newspaper called The Observer, and in it he expressed his Christian views and he expressed moral views. He spoke out on the issues of the day. He said, this is the wrong thing going on. This is the way it should be. Slavery's wrong. Here's what the Founding Fathers wanted. When we lost Congress in 1820, and they did the Missouri Compromise, they then moved us for the first time in a pro-slavery direction. We were not a pro-slavery nation until that act in 1820s. And so he just goes back and expresses all this. Well, it made the other side really mad. They came in and took his press and smashed it and tore it up and destroyed it. So he's been shown, well, what he does is he then promptly goes out and buys a second press. And with that second press, he continued to do the same thing. He expressed Christian views, he addressed moral issues, and they came in and they destroyed his second press. No problem. He goes out, he buys his third press. And he expressed Christian views and he addressed moral issues, and they came in and destroyed that third press. And no problem, he has got this solved. He wrote a letter to his family at the time, because he's now done this 3 times. You know, all he's doing is his right, First Amendment right of free speech, First Amendment right of freedom of the press, First Amendment right of religion. He's got the right to express his religious beliefs. That's the fight we're fighting right now, the conscience issue with homosexuality, NDOs, HROs, ERAs, all the things that go with that at the city level. So we got the same fight going, whether we have the right to have a religious belief and express that, whether we can say our morals publicly without getting attacked. All the stuff that he was having is what we did. And so he wrote his family and he said, I'm sure what I'm doing is good and the devil would not be so mad about it. But I have a hard battle of it. I'm not particularly enjoying what's happening here. I don't like the fact that they're destroying all the stuff I've got, that they're coming after me and my reputation, that they're calling me the names, that they're tearing my private... I guess the devil's really mad, so it must be something good going on, but it's not enjoyable. So then he goes back and he gets himself his fourth press, and he does the same thing again, expressed Christian views and addressed moral issues, and the mobs came and tried to burn down his house on top of it. They tried to, as it turned out, they were not able to do that, and so, you know, after hours and hours of the siege, they leave, and he goes outside only to find that 5 of them are laying in wait, and they executed him right when he walked out the door. They just shot him down right on the spot. But he was a voice that would not stop, and he was by himself. He was in part of Missouri, first off, that didn't want him. He moved across the Mississippi River into Alton, Illinois. They didn't want him, so the Missouri guys came over and chased him into a free state and harassed him in a free state, wouldn't allow him to express those views. And so his burial place is in Alton, Illinois, and this is his gravestone, but it's interesting to see what his declaration was. He said, I can die at my post, but I cannot desert it. If I have to be the only one here, I'm going to die standing for what's right, and I'm just not going to back off. I can't desert. See, that's standing alone. That's the kind of stuff it takes to change the culture, and that's what he did. That's why he's one of the huge abolition voices that's credited with turning to people say, wait a minute, you killed that guy for his freedom of speech? You killed it for his moral views? You killed him for expressing his religious views? And then you start seeing the opposition turn against the other side. Another guy I'll point to is Napoli Daggett. We rarely get taught about him. He was a minister out of Connecticut. He was actually the president of Yale University. And in 1780, the British were attacking Barton, New London area, were right around Yale. And as they're attacking, all the young men from the town, the militias get together, and he's going out with the militia to face the British that are coming in. And so they're happy to see him because he's the local minister, he's the president of Yale, and he's there, and they're all cheering for him. And he just rode right on through the middle of them and kept going forward toward where the British were. He gets up on top of the hill and gets himself set up there. Now, as it turns out, the 100 or so young men from there that was the militia, they see the British coming and they go attack the British, which is really good. And after a few shots fired, the British turn and run away from them. They're all hollering and cheering, and they chase the British right over the hill. And the 2,500 British are waiting for them on the other side of the hill. And suddenly, being 100 against 2,500 doesn't look so good, and they turn around and run the other direction as fast as they can, because you got 2,500 British there. So now there is no militia between the British and the town, and the British are going right into town, and as they're marching into town, guys keep falling. British guys keep falling along the way, and you just hear a solitary shot every once in a while. And what it was Napoli Daggett was up on top of the hill by himself taking on 2,500 British. Everybody else is up. He's loading his gun, shooting a British guy, loading his gun, shooting another one, loading his gun, shooting another one. And one of the officers said, find out what that is. Sent a sergeant, a squad up there, and they got up there, and here's this old guy, a white-haired guy. He's there, and he's loading his gun. Old man, what are you doing? He says, I'm exercising my God-given rights of war. Loads his gun. And so they took it away from him and said, old man, if we let you go, will you promise not to fire on His Majesty's troops again? He said, nothing's more unlikely. And so they took him, they bayoneted him, they ran him into town. I think he received something like 77 bayonet pricks, because every time the old man would slow down, it was a very hot day. Every time they slowed down, they'd get behind him and just prick him. And so he eventually died as a result of his wounds. But here's the guy. Tell me he thought he was going to win. One guy gets 2,500 when everybody's got a single shot back then. Now maybe if you're the guy at the top of the hill with a minigun and you've got 3,000 rounds a minute, maybe you got a shot if they've all got just regular revolvers. But when everybody has a single fire rifle, you really think you got a shot against 25? That wasn't the issue. The issue was, I'm going to do my duty if I have to do it alone. Everybody else is deserted, but I'm not going to desert. I'm going to stand here and do it. You also have the example of what happened when the British took the 800 troops and marched toward Lexington. You had the Battle of Lexington Green. From there, the British went on to the North Bridge of Concord, where they encountered 400 American troops. And the first one, back at Lexington, it was 70 Americans taking on 800 British. In the second one, you had 400 Americans taking on 800 British. The British decided the odds are moving against us. We need to get back. They had to march 19 miles back to Charleston, just outside of Boston. So on the road back, they are destroying stuff as they're going. They're attacking Americans as they go. And so Americans lined up alongside the road, that 19 miles, to fight the British as they're going back. And one occasion, as the British were marching back on the road, and they're destroying property as they go and shooting Americans as they go, they come to the house of an old man. His name is Samuel Whitmore. He's 80 years old at the time. They come up to his house, and British are coming in. He's a veteran of the French and Indian War. He sees what's about to happen. So he takes his 2 pistols and his rifle. He walks outside and meets the British, shoots one pistol, shoots another pistol, shoots one with the rifle. He pulls his sword and starts wading into them. And as he's about to come down with the sword, they shoot him right in the head. They just shoot him in the face and just obliterate him. He falls on the ground. They're so angry that he's killed 3 of them already that they stabbed him 13 times. The bayonet just stood over and drove it in. The next guy drove it. And so there he is, shot in the head, shot in the face 13 times, except he's not dead. He actually lived through it and lived another 18 years. Here is actually the stone they've erected there at his home in Massachusetts. Near the spot, Samuel Whitmore, then 80 years old, killed 3 British soldiers, April 19, 1775. He was shot, bayoneted, beaten, and left for dead, but recovered and lived to be 98 years of age. He's out by himself because all the other guys aren't. See, this is the mentality you get. I'm willing to stand by myself if I have to. If you don't have that commitment, you're not going to reform the culture. So that willingness to do it, that's what David's mighty men. If you look at why David chose his mighty men, you know, there were 30 that were chosen in the Bible, and out of the 30, there were the 3 that were more so than others. And out of the 3, there's a guy named Shammah. And Shammah, interesting why he became a mighty man, one of David's chief leaders, this guy Shammah. And the scriptures tells us why. It says the Philistines were gathered together where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. In other words, a bean patch. Lentils and beans, they're growing a bean patch. And the people fled from the Philistines. But Shammah stood in the midst of the ground and defended it, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord won a great victory. So here you got everybody gone except one guy, and he you know, strategically, what's the deal with the bean patch? That's not it. It's not whether that's strategically important or not. It's that I'm not going to back up, and you're not going to make me back up. Everybody else is gone, but you still got to face me. And so the question becomes, are you willing to stand alone and defend the bean patch? Because that's what made Shammah a mighty man. He was willing to take on things that everybody else were not willing to lose their life over. They're all, who wants a bean patch? We're out of here. Let the Philistines have it. No, we're not doing that. And so all through history, whether it be Bible or American history, you always have this message of being willing to stand alone. And if you don't have that commitment to stand alone, it's hard to change the culture. It's hard to change a Republican Party that doesn't want to be changed. It's hard to change the moderates and the rhinos and the others because we tend to be conservatives. This is the battle that's got to be fought. If you're not willing to stand by yourself as long as it takes, John Quincy Adams, who desires results are God's, till I die, I'm going to be standing here. I'm going to be defending this bean patch, whatever that happens to be. The fourth thing I'll point you to is becoming offensive-minded. In the scripture, Proverbs 21, 22 says, the wise man attacks the city of the mighty and pulls down the stronghold in which they trust. Notice a wise man is offensive. He goes on the offense, not on the defense. If you go to Washington, D.C., along the banks of the Potomac, it's this building right here. This is the National War College. This is not where they teach you how to fight wars. This is where they teach you how to win wars. And it's a whole different thing between fighting a war and winning a war. They take lieutenant colonels and hires and take them through this school so that if you get involved in a war, you need to know not how to fight it, but how to win it. The most famous course probably there is the 9 Principles of War, tactical science course they have. And it's striking that out of the 9 principles of how to fight war, defense is not one of the principles of war. Offense is. Offense is one of the 9 principles. You go on offense because then you're forcing your opponent to respond to you. They say defense is only a temporary time whereby you reorganize to go back on offense. If you're on defense and not attacking, then you're in trouble. I've run a number of campaigns. I've recruited so many guys for office, trained probably thousands for office. And when you get your opponent to start repeating your rhetoric, you're winning. You're making them go on the defensive. They're having to defend. When you make the claims, when you make the assertions, and they have to start repeating what you're saying, that's a really good sign. But that's part of the offensive. And we have a legislative network of about 800 state legislators from across the country that wall builders. We have this pro-family legislative network. In the last session, I actually had one of the guys from the War College come in and say, for legislators, here's how the War College works for you. Here's the same principles. Here's how you apply them. And as conservatives, we need the same thing. But it goes back to that biblical principle. I think you have to be on offense. If I can take you for a moment to the Constitution. From a First Amendment religious liberty standpoint, we'll switch it down. Can we kill the other one? Ready? Okay. So from a First Amendment religious principle standpoint, the court started attacking religious principles back in 1962 when they went specifically at that time after school prayer. They said, well, we'll defend Bible reading, then we lost that. Well, we'll defend nativity scenes, we lost that. We'll defend the 10 Commandments, we lost that. And we were just defending all these rights, all these, and what happens is every time we defend a right and lose it, we've had to take a step back. But you told us, court, we could be here. Oh, now we lose that. Well, you told us we could be, and so what's been happening for 40 years, we've been taking all these steps back and losing all this stuff, but we're defending what little turf we have left. And then about 7 or 8 legal groups came forward and said, why are we defending? Why don't we go back out there and take the ground we used to have? Why are we on defense and not on offense? And so they went on offense. And I work with all these legal groups. They're great legal groups. As we say in Texas, they'll fight at the drop of a hat, but they'll drop the hat to start the fight. And they love it. We recruit people all the time that want to fight and want to sue. We like that. One of the things we've been working on the IRS now for 8 years is we've been trying to get the IRS to come after a pastor who will preach a political sermon in the pulpit. Started that some 8 years ago. We said, wait a minute, IRS has got no right to regulate churches because, number one, churches have freedom of speech, they have freedom of association, they get together for whatever purpose they want to. They have the freedom of religion, press, speech, assembly. We had 4 constitutional freedoms, so lined up this court case against the IRS, and on that first year we recruited 33 pastors who were willing to cross the line. We specifically trained them. Here's what's going to happen. The IRS is going to come after you. When that happens, make sure you've done this, this, and this. Had it all lined out. I remember Gus Booth at Work Community Church in Minnesota. He got out there that Sunday, and it was before the primaries at that time. And he said, hey, we got people running the Democrat primary over here. We got people running the Republican primary over here. They're saying this on the Democrat side. They're saying this on the Republican side. Here's what the Bible says right here. And I'll tell you, based on what the Bible says, there's no way you can vote for her or him. There's no way. And he just went through and endorsed candidates right there in the pulpit. And bless his heart, it was a little community church. We made sure everybody knew he was going to cross the line. And so that morning on the front row was cameras from HBO, cameras from ABC, cameras from CNN. He walks out of this little study and got all these national cameras. And as soon as he finished, we took recordings of the sermon and sent them to the IRS. You got to nail this guy. He crossed the line. Come after this guy. Next. IRS wouldn't come after him because they know, like we know, that if they get in court, they'll lose this. They would rather have 370,000 pastors think you can't say anything at all than to go into court and find out there's no limitations on what you can say from the pulpit. So the first year there was 33 that we turned in. The next year I think it was 86 people we turned in. The next year it was like 100 we turned in. Last year it was 1,800 people we turned in the IRS. And it's growing every year. And the IRS is not interested in having a lawsuit over this. They keep saying they have 6 months to be able to make a decision and render a judgment. And 18 months later, they're saying, nah, we think we're going to let that one pass. Well, the point's the same. All right, we didn't win the case we wanted, but we've now proven they're not going to come after you if you do this stuff. And that was the point that we know. But that's offensive, and that's what these groups kind of do. They get on offense and go after it like that. And that's what the other side always used to do. I remember as I traveled across the country, I would talk to school principals who say, you know, we get an annual visit, sometimes twice a year from the ACLU. They come to us in the principal's office and say, Mr. Principal, if we hear that a kid in your school reads the Bible while at school, if we hear that you have any kind of prayer over lunch, if we hear that you sing a Christmas carol at a winter holiday meeting, if we hear any of that, we'll have you in court so fast on a $5 million civil rights lawsuit, you'll never know what hit you. And the principal, oh my gosh, $5 million, and they see a kid doing something, kid, stop that immediately. And so what happens is they're trained to stop everything they see because they're scared of a lawsuit for $5 million against them. So that's how we have voluntarily taken so much out, because we've been threatened. The other side's been on the offense, and we've not been. Now, these other groups are out there. Matter of fact, one of the cases, one of the U.S. Supreme Court from our side, Jay Sekulow argued at ACLJ, it was Westside versus Mergens. It's an 8-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision. Even the liberals went along with it and said, you know what? Freedom of speech works at every school. So if you have a journalism club, or if you have a rodeo club or whatever, you can have an evangelism club and a Bible club and a prayer club. You can have all these religious activities. If there's any other kind of speech permitted, you got to have religious speech too. So we get this 8-0 decision, and somehow the media never talked about that 8-0 decision. So what Jay did was, out of the ACLJ, he went to some donors, and they raised money to rent 4 jets. And those 4 jets they rented, leased, and they would put teams of attorneys in those jets, and they would fly to city after city across America. They would go to Cincinnati, and they would go to Indianapolis, and they'd go to St. Louis, and these attorneys would get off the planes and would go, and they'd knock on the door of the principal, said, Mr. Principal, here's a Supreme Court decision. We just won, 8-0 decision. If we hear that you will not allow these kids to pray over their lunch, if we hear that you will not allow them to have Bible reading in school, if we hear that you, and went through and says, we'll have you in court so fast on a $10 million civil rights lawsuit, you'll never know what hit you. Now, amazingly, there's 16,000 school districts in America. When Jay did that, within 18 months, 12,000 of those school districts had Bible clubs going, prayer clubs going. It was real easy. We just had to go on the offense and do it because the schools were becoming offensive-minded. You don't let the opposition dictate what you do. You do the right thing, and you get out there and you make them respond to your arguments. The 5th thing I would point to is using strategic incrementalism. I'll go back to John Quincy Adams on this. All the time that he fought slavery across this year, 17 years he fought slavery. He was in the minority for a long time, then he eventually got those guys brought over to his point. And as he did, he worked on this throughout his life. And it's strikingly that he's working on throughout his life. You watch his tactics. And if you read the 17 years he fought the slavery issue in Congress, what you see is that he was really into the principle of incrementalism. And incrementalism, a lot of people say, oh, you're compromised. You need to go for everything. No, this is actually a biblical principle. You have Deuteronomy 7:22 and Exodus 23, verses 29 and 30. As the children of Israel are going into the promised land to take what God has promised them, here's what God tells them. Notice what God says, for example, in Deuteronomy 7:22. God says, the Lord your God will drive the opposition out before you. Only little by little. You're not going to win this all at once. You better get ready for a long battle. And by the way, remember when he came in, the Lord said, hey, wait till you guys see all the giants I left for you in here. This is going to be so cool. You get to fight giants. If you don't want to fight, you need to live in the wilderness, because that's where you don't fight. If you want to go in the promised land, you better get used to fighting, because that's all the promised land was fighting. And God said, this is so cool. I left you 7 tribes of giants, and you guys get to fight. See, he said, I'm going to give it to you, but only little by little. He says, you will not be allowed to eliminate them all at once. And our political strategy oftentimes is, I'm not going to compromise. We got to end it. Well, maybe we have to end it, but it's the camel's nose in the tent. It's the biblical principle of a little leaven leavens the whole loaf. You get a little bit, you get another little bit, you get another little. We don't win football games by trying to throw a bomb every time you get the ball. We work on 3-yard gains, 4-yard gains, got 7 there, lost 2 there, got 8 here. You work on a series of small games, that's how you win games. And that's the biblical principle politically that you have to use. That is not compromise to have incrementalism. He said the same thing in Exodus 23, verses 29 and 30. He says, I will not drive them out in a single year. Little by little, I'll drive them out from before you. That is God's way of doing things, little by little. So when you're trying to reform a culture that needs to be reformed as badly as this one needs to be reformed, just start taking little things and make those victories, because those little victories add into big victories as you go along. So that's part of the principle, incrementalism. That's what they were very good at. That's what they understood. State Board of Education of Texas I want to give you one example here how this works, and I'll close out with the last 2 points. The State Board of Education of Texas is very influential for all states in the United States. Texas and California, between our two states, we have 26% of the nation's public school kids. When a textbook publisher puts $10 to $20 million into producing a curriculum for a state, they got to be able to make their money back free market-wise, otherwise they can't keep staying in business. The only two states that have enough students for them to make their money back when they do textbooks is Texas and California. Because of what happened a few years ago under Gray Davis, California's been so bankrupt for so long that they're out of the textbook business now. So pretty much Texas drives what happens in all textbooks. All textbooks somehow meet Texas standards. We have Texas standards. We set up, we go through the process. We have 15 elected state members, 15 elected members from the State Board of Education. Those elected members then choose teachers who write the standards. They bring in experts like me. There were 6 of us brought in to look at what the teachers did and make the recommendations back to the State Board. State Board then passes those standards. They give it to the publishers. Publishers write the textbooks. They come back to Texas. We review it to see if they align with those standards. And if we do, then we'll pay for their textbooks. And at that point, that's where everybody else gets a textbook. So if you're in Indiana, your standards are going to be core Texas standards. If you're in Oklahoma, you can write your own standards, and that's great. You need to, but you're going to be stuck with these textbooks. And so what they do is they change a few pages in each textbook. They bring it to a different state to kind of match their standards. But everything is driven by Texas. The difficulty we had in Texas was when this process, we really got focused on it about 15 years ago, we were losing every vote by a margin of 14 to 1. 14, every single vote. There was nothing that was pro-Constitution, pro-limited government. There was nothing that was pro-faith. There was nothing on what we would call traditional American values. It was all anti. It was really liberal stuff. And we lost every race, every vote, 14 to 1. 14 to 1. We'd lose everything. And so we said, we got to get that back. All right, now, after these guys come up for election every other time, there's going to be 8 this year, there's going to be 7 this year. When these 8 guys come up, we might can pick up 2 seats there, maybe 3. So we got to recruit 7 guys to run for that. And so we pick up 2 seats. Now we got 3 votes 2 years later. Well, the next 7 are coming up. We need to pick up some of them as well. So we started picking up 1 or 2 at a time. It took us 10 years to get to where we now have 11 votes in the State Board of Education. So as a result, we win everything. As a matter of fact, in the last standards we just did for the State Board voted and said to every publisher, any textbook that says that America is a democracy rather than a republic, we will not fund that textbook. It's going to say if you don't know, there are 7 different forms of government. Democracy is very different from republic. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that we have to maintain a republican form of government. We now teach that in our textbooks. We could never have gotten that vote 10 years ago, but it took us 10 years to get the State Board of Education. That's incrementalism. As a result now, we win all the votes. Now, the problem is you also have to maintain that along the way, so people retire and they get beat, and you have to get others in. You just have to keep after this thing. You don't ever get to the point you say, finally, we got a majority, we can rest. No, finally, we got a majority, now we got to work harder. And that literally is what happens at that point. So that's the 5th thing, is incrementalism. The last 2 go through real quickly. The 6th one is becoming transgenerational. Transgenerational, when you go back and look at what happened with Israel, in Judges 13, they were under the oppression of the enemy. The enemy was just beating their nation up, and they started praying, God, deliver us from the oppression of the enemy. We need a revival. So change the nation, change the hearts of the people. And so in Judges 13, verse 5, God answered, said, okay, I've heard your prayers. I'm going to change your nation. I'm going to deliver you from these people. Here's how it works. He sent an angel to earth. The angel went to Manoah, and said to Manoah, I've heard the prayers of this people. I'm going to deliver them from the oppression of the enemy. We're going to have a different nation. We're going to have a revival, if you will. Here's how it's going to work. Your wife's going to get pregnant. When that kid grows up, he's going to be the national deliverer. Wait a minute. 20 years before that kid grows up, I thought you said you answered our prayers. Yeah, but often God answers prayers by sending you a different generation. It's not always the way we expect it to be. and across the Bible and across history. That's the way it works. You see that transgenerational thing? Look where we are now with our kids. I think they're the answer to our prayers. We've been praying since Roe v. Wade about getting abortion stopped. I think we're getting the answer to our prayers on that. Right now, if you look at the issue of abortion, 51% of the nation believes that abortion is morally wrong. When you look at these kids, 72% believe that abortion is morally wrong. Only 19% support abortion on men. When these guys become our leaders, what are the chances that we end Roe v. Wade? Really high. When only 19%. They say, oh man, we're talking another 20 years. We can't wait 20 years. No, that's that incrementalism, and it's transgenerational. I'm going to bust my tail right now to do everything I can to overturn Roe v. Wade. But in the meantime, there's another generation coming along, and the millennials are very pro-life. Now, they're wrong on other issues, and that's where they have to be taught those issues because they've gone through an educational system that has the wrong value system. You heard Robbie talk about it. They're very relational, and they're looking for purpose in life. These are folks that can be taught and can be reached, and that's what has to happen. I love going back to John Quincy Adams. Now, you can tell from that picture he's not a real people person. He is one of the most famous guys in the world. He has settled disputes across the globe. He's negotiated peace treaties for other nations in conflict. He negotiated the end of the War of 1812. He's been a foreign diplomat everywhere. He's a U.S. president. My gosh, everybody knows John Quincy Adams. Now he's in the House of Representatives, and every freshman class that comes in says, oh my gosh, I got to buddy up with this. And he's just not a people person. He just didn't buddy up with all the freshmen that came. It'd be like Ronald Reagan going from the president to the House. Everybody wants their picture taken with him. Even the Democrats, as he was at the State of the Union, always wanted their picture with Ronald Reagan because he was that popular. So same thing, and for 17 years, that's 9 freshman classes they come in. It's like, oh no, not another freshman class. For whatever reason, there was one freshman at one time he seemed to bond up with. And he seemed to really like this kid, and he talked to him and said, I came up in 1939, I came up with this 3-step plan to end slavery, but I couldn't get the Senate to go along with it. We could have ended slavery years ago, and and he just went through and had a brain dump with this kid on abolition, all the things he had learned, all the strategic things he had accomplished, and all the strategy. And this kid's so inspired, but the problem is, 14 months later, John Quincy Adams died. And when John Quincy Adams died, this kid was actually made a pallbearer, a congressional pallbearer, to take the body of John Quincy Adams back to Quincy, Mass. So John Quincy Adams is on the train going back to Quincy, Mass, at 100 and something miles, and all along the tracks, there were hundreds of thousands of people lined up just to get a glimpse of the bodies that passed. And this kid was, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I can make a difference too. So he went back and ran for re-election, except he just didn't get elected. He kept losing The next election he won was 15 years later, and the kid actually was Abraham Lincoln. So the kid was. And so the kid gets elected as president of the United States, says, I know a 3-step plan to end slavery. And so he goes into this thing and he says, the Emancipation Proclamation, that was one of the things that John Quincy Adams said, you declare slavery for all those. And he just, went through the steps. And so what happens is he becomes the abolition president, but it was really JQA that trained him. It's that transgenerational stuff. You see, JQA wanted the end of slavery. He never saw the end of slavery. But you know what? He trained the kid that brought the end of slavery, which is pretty cool. So that's that duty kind of driven stuff where you look across generations instead of thinking where we are right now, think where are we going to be 10 years from now, 15 years, and who can I train to make sure this keeps going forward? And see, that's what we were looking for back then is transgenerational. Final example I'll give you of this, and then we'll close out. Final example is the Great Awakening. I told you the Great Awakening is what produced the American Revolution, produced our American government. The Great Awakening, you look at the leaders in the Great Awakening, the leaders responsible include preachers like Reverend Samuel Cooper. He was the guy in Massachusetts. You have folks like Gilbert Tennant. He was the guy in Pennsylvania. He was the Great Awakening guy in Pennsylvania. You have guys like Whitfield, we've already talked about. You had Samuel Davies. He was the guy in Virginia. And you look at these guys and what they did and their huge efforts in the Great Awakening. It's pretty fun stuff because as you look at Samuel Cooper from Massachusetts, all this time he's preaching the Great Awakening for decades. There's this little young kid running around with him, all these meetings going with him, and they're always hanging together and doing family vacations together. And who's the little kid? It's a guy named John Quincy Adams. Who's the kid? Really? So this Great Awakening guy tutored the guy that now brought so much change. And then you've got the same thing with Gilbert Tennant. He was the guy in Pennsylvania. And he had this little kid running around with him to all the meetings with him, just hanging by his hip. And there's a guy named Benjamin Rush. John Adams said that Benjamin Rush is one of the 3 most notable founding fathers. John Adams said you got George Washington, Ben Franklin, Benjamin Rush. of the tutorship of Gilbert Tennant. And then you got George Whitefield himself, and one of the little kids that he had such an impact on was a guy named Elias Boudinot. Elias Boudinot was the president of Congress during the Revolution. He signed the peace treaty to end the American Revolution. He became a framer of the Bill of Rights. He was a member of the first Congress. Unbelievable what Whitefield had just. Who would have thought that little kid back then would turn out to be the leader of Congress and do what he did in the American Revolution? And then you got this guy, Samuel Davies. He's considered the greatest pulpit preacher in American history. Nobody was a better orator in American history than he was. And he had this little snotty-nosed kid running around with him all the time. That little kid turned out to be a kid named Patrick Henry. And Patrick Henry says he learned his oratory skills from listening to Samuel Davies. See, in every case, the Great Awakening brought another generation that got things turned around in a different direction. And when you look at that transgenerational connection, that's what it takes to have a change. So these guys are the millennials of their generation, quite frankly. This is the young group, and it takes time to get them to think right and move them in, get a relationship started with them, get the trust going, to be able to impart to them, but that's part of it. So the seventh and final thing is you have to focus on local things. If I take you to the first 4 battles of the American Revolution, and by the way, I will say the biggest problem I think that we as conservatives have right now is we have 24/7, 365 national media. As a result of what we get on the national level, we are so ticked off at so many things. I mean, quite frankly, I wish I could get the Supreme Court to know that marriage is between a man and a woman, but I can't. And I've got connections all over D.C., and I can't call any Supreme Court justice. I know justices, and I can't call them and say, guys, vote this way on this. I can't do it. It frustrates me. I've got great connections. And the same way at the White House, I wish I could get the president to like Israel, but he doesn't like Israel. I wish I could get McConnell in the Senate to take up the 282 bills the House has passed that he won't even touch. I wish I could do that. And I got great relationships with so many of these guys. I can't. And so what happens is we all see that. We say, I can't do anything. And we get paralyzed as a result of it. Because we know that we can't really change the system that much. That's not the way they thought in the American Revolution. The first battle was the Battle of Lexington. It was followed by the Battle of Northbridge and Concord. It was followed up by the Road to Boston battle, followed up by the Battle of Bunker Hill. You know what's notable about those first 4 battles? Nobody ever contacted George and said, George, what do you want us to do? You're the national commander. How do we do this? Nobody contacted him at all. What they did was they said, our community will take care of it. So down here in the case of right here at Lexington, the Reverend Jonas Clark said, I got a church. I got 73 guys in my church. We'll take on the 800 British. Not a problem. It was Jonas Clark who went out there at his church and took on the British. By the way, 18 Americans were shot down that day, and they included both black patriots and white patriots. Black patriots like Prince Estabrook, white patriots like John Robbins. They all went to church together. There's a church who went out there and took care of it. It's our town. We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it, George. You got it. Then you had the Battle of Northbridge at Concord. Battle of Northbridge there at Concord. The Reverend William Emerson shows up with 400 guys on that one. And that's what takes care of that one. Then on the way back, you had all these things that happened. We talked about Samuel Whitmore, but it was all the preachers that showed up with their churches. The Reverend Payson Phillips, the Reverend Jonathan French, all these guys said, it's our community. We'll take care of the issues. And then when you get to the Battle of Bunker Hill right here, it was the Reverend Francis Willard who said, I'll form the companies out of my church to go over there and fight them. No problem. See, everybody thought about taking care of their own communities. If we take care of our own school boards, if we take care of our own city council, our own junior college district, our own water districts, if you take care of your own community, then the whole nation gets taken care of. That's how we won the American Revolution. It was not national leadership. It was everybody taking care of what was on right there, and then it leads to a national victory. And George Washington's a brilliant guy, and God raised him up for such a time as that, but they thought locally. And that's where they spent their political time and capital, was in teaching and touching and converting and changing the people in the local area, changing leaders if they had to. And that's what really makes the difference. So that locally part, that's the 7th part. So if we're going to have an American revival of sorts, if we're going to have a makeover, those are the 7 historical and biblical principles that have always been part of it. Easy for us to replicate today if we will. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, we've got the table back there with all sorts of historical information on it. You can find that interesting. Thanks for
David Barton, Dinesh D'Souza. I'll open this with a question that I have, which came from my speech at the beginning of the day. And my speech was about 5 different factions that kind of make up the non-left. People who don't believe that all good things come from government, that government does all things or should do all things. These are members of a coalition of people, which is different than what we've had before. Before, we had a very solid set of principles upon which everybody agreed. Once you didn't agree with 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the number was, you fell out and then you sort of dropped out of politics, which is kind of where we are now. We have a lot of distrust and, there's a lot of cultural changes. So my question to you two is, we don't necessarily have this foundational idea. A lot of people have been brought up without the Judeo-Christian foundation in their household. They just don't understand it. They're not really sure what a Christian is saying when they're talking. They're not sure where they're coming from. They know they don't like it because they've had 40 years of brainwashing going on in school and in media or wherever they get it from. So my question to you is, upon what do we form the coalition for a non-left, i.e. conservative, or a new conservative movement? And if you guys have thoughts on that, I'd be interested in both of you guys.
Hey Dave, how are we doing that?
The last successful conservative coalition was the Reagan coalition, which was based upon, as I understand it, 3 principles. The first one was there are some bad guys in the world, and no amount of lengthy conversations with them is going to prevent them from being bad. And therefore force is a necessary, although regrettable, component of foreign policy. The United States, at the end of the day, doesn't want to occupy other countries, but our foreign policy is essentially don't bomb us and we'd like to trade with you. That's pretty much it. In domestic policy, the basic idea was that a free market with a lot of opportunity, ladders of opportunity, that's what the Republican Party stands for. Creating a framework in which people can climb the ladder to the best of their abilities. We all recognize that luck and other things play a role in life, but we have a chance to try. And finally, in social policy, the basic idea was that we don't just want the free society, we also want the decent society. In other words, freedom is not neutral as to its content. We want when the founders said the American dream, they didn't just mean that you have the right to choose. If 400 million Americans chose to become pornographers, the American dream would not be a success. In other words, the content of your choice matters. And this was the Reagan coalition. And I don't for the life of me think we need to change it. In other words, those ideas remain extremely powerful and extremely popular in the country today. We could win elections on them in a minute. But I don't even hear those ideas articulated. I've never heard a Republican in 20 years make an effective moral defense of these 3 principles at the core level, at the commonsensical level. I never hear it. So part of the responsibility, I think, falls on our side. Even with young people. People say, like, young people are rejecting conservatism. No, young people never hear it. They're not exposed to it. They don't even know what it is. And we have to bear some responsibility for that, for not having done that.
I would say that in its core is the problem. We've gone from a soundbite at the time of Nixon being 68 seconds, broadcast soundbite, today it's under 6 seconds. And so how do you communicate a message in under 6 seconds? And we not only talk in sound bites, we think in sound bites. And so we've not done a good job of laying out and articulating why we do it. And to do that, it actually takes some relationships and some time. I'm going to go back to my days when I was with the Republican Party in Texas, helping run the party, and we had different factions that would fight with one another. The Chamber of Commerce business faction is always opposed to the social conservative faction. That tends to be one of the splitting lines within the Republican Party, social conservatives versus others versus moderates, etc. And the way we were able to overcome in Texas, and the reason it's a problem to us in the party in Texas was because conservatives will give you time and effort and labor, but they don't give you much money. Moderates will give you a lot of money, but they never give you time, effort, and labor. And it takes both of those to get candidates elected. And so what we were able to do is we went to the business community and said, you know, here's the top 22 state representatives in the last election that fought for your issues. Here's the top 22 best economic votes you had. Oh, by the way, 21 of these guys are hardcore social conservatives. So it actually is very clear that if you get someone who's a consistent conservative in both social and economic issues, it's better for your interest. So we actually got the Chamber of Commerce business community to contribute to social conservatives who were into life and marriage and liberty and other things, not because they agreed with those issues, because they didn't, but they agreed with the results that they got when they got a true conservative in there. And so we were able to bring that coalition together. We we did a lot of record-setting things in Texas. We ended up becoming a Republican state for the first time in 130 years, but it was touching those coalitions, talking to them, offering them evidence that shows why what they're after is good. And this is not a new fight. We've actually had this fight all the way back in the founding era. When Ben Franklin was an ambassador to France, France was very anti-religion, anti-morals, anti-marriage, etc. And they were immigrating to America like crazy. And Franklin in 1780 did a piece on if you're going to immigrate to America from France, here's what you need to know about America. Went through it. And so a lot of those who came here had a different set of morals. And one of them was Thomas Paine, who came here in 1774, got set up in business with Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush. 1776 did Common Sense that launched him. So he'd come out of that European thinking, and when he finally did The Age of Reason in 1794 is when it was published. He was working on it for years before. He sent a rough draft manuscript to that to Franklin, who'd helped bring him to America in the first place. And the rough draft manuscript, he said, I like God, but I hate religion. I hate Christianity particularly. This is really terrible stuff. And he attacked religion throughout. And Franklin took that piece, and two things back to him were really powerful. He said, Thomas, understand what you're doing here. He said, I would first advise you to burn this piece before seeing anybody else. This is not going to be a good outcome on this. He said, if men are so wicked with religion, what would they be without it? You don't like religion, but look what happens in secular nations where you have no religion, no religious values. And he said, by the way, part of your argument is that I hate religion, and I'm a really good guy. I use loyalty, I use integrity, I use truthfulness, and Franklin said, yeah, you did, but you got to remember that you were educated in all those values in your Christian education that you had. Just the fact that you're secular now doesn't mean the values are bad. And so it is with my neighbor. If my neighbor's an atheist, great. But if he'll live by the 10 Commandments, he'll make a great neighbor. If he won't steal my wife and take my property and kill me, etc., those are values to live by. And so that was the argument that Franklin used even at that time. And when Paine came out, he disregarded Franklin's advice, came out and attacked religion. That was the argument used on the other side. It's not religion, it's not perfect. But the values, when they're applied, produce a very civil society that we all like. And that's what Paine lost so much. So I think there's coalition building that goes in how you argue. You have to find common ground to people you're touching, and there's nearly always common ground between us and them, but the pragmatics also work. You can show results, as we did with the Chamber of Commerce, who don't like socially conservative values, but you get the results you want economically when you elect our guys to office, and that worked for them as well.
Thank you. Please come up and pose a question. By the way, I became the new owner of this fancy Samsung thingy here. I don't know if it's white. It's like a 7-inch thing. Anybody lose one of these? No, not yet? All right. Well, if you do find that you don't have it, it doesn't fit in a... Oh, it's got a person's name on it. I didn't think to do that. New young people. Oh, you Esperanza Lanfear. Oh, okay, good. Very good, Mike Coombs.
All right, I got you touched on ecumenicalism, and that, and I don't know if you know, here in Alaska, probably one of the best examples of ecumenicalism was back Tony Knowles' era. This is several governors ago. We didn't have concealed carry, so we did a concealed carry permit that actually the first draft, the first one that got passed, actually there was more places you could carry in the open than you could carry concealed. And it was very ordinance. There was a lot of problems with it, but a lot of us, myself included, got our concealed carry permit. We went through that process. Then the next session, they made some fixes, made it less onerous. And then the next session, they fixed it some more, and again, and again, and again. And Tony Knowles vetoed 3 of them, I think. And the veto override happened on every one of them. So we won, and we kept on winning, and we kept on winning, to the point now we're constitutional carry. We don't need a permit, we can carry concealed, and there's only 5 places we can. So that's incrementalism at work in Alaska. Question is, there's a lot of incrementalization that we could do to fix this nation. But with the Obama, with the problems that we got splits, we got the McConnells, we got all these things. Do we have enough time to incrementalize? Do we have to even go harder now? And how do we incrementalize and charge forward at the same time?
Well, let's recognize that the left practices incrementalism, bad incrementalism on its side. In the 1986 tax reform, as a result of Reagan, this tax reform of 83 and then the 86 Act, the top increment marginal tax rate in this country came down from 70% to 28%. That was not incrementalism, that was a revolution. And we had it here in America. Now the left realized that they cannot undo that. There's no way they could take it. Right now they've taken it up to 39.5%. But it's taken them 4 elections to get there. So they've slowly pushed the top rate up. And they've gone from 28 to 39. They're still a long way from 70. So what they do now, if they want to go higher, is they start creating the intellectual ground for 70. So they'll say things like, well, during World War II we had 80. The top rate was 80% in wartime. And so they try to get the human mind around that ridiculous number where you make, 100 cents and they take 80 cents on the dollar. They have to get people used to that, but they still won't get 80. They're going to move up and up and up and up. That's why when Obama says fair share, he never says what the fair share is. Because if he was an honest liberal, he would at least tell you in what society he would be a conservative. Meaning, I want to raise taxes, and I think 40% is fair. And at 40%, I don't want to raise taxes anymore because everyone is paying their fair share, and then I will get out of politics and go do something else. No, because to him, he wants to keep moving. Once you get to 40, he's going to go for 50. And once you agree to 50, he'll go to 60. So they can't reveal where they actually want to go. So on both sides, you've got this incrementalism. And the reason for the incrementalism is we live in a democratic society where you have to win people over to your side. You need consent to be able to move forward. If you overreach, then you'll be defeated the next time around, and all your hard work will be undone. That's why incrementalism is necessary. So for example, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He didn't have the coalition. Abolitionism could not have carried the day. So Lincoln was a moderate, saying, he even said to the South, people don't know this, I will agree to a constitutional amendment to keep slavery in the South, in every state in which it now exists. I will merely block it from the new territories. Lincoln agreed to this, to avert the Civil War. Incrementalism.
The other thing that I would throw on that is, and I'm just going to go ahead and kick the ant's nest. Let's see what happens. From my standpoint, theologically, it doesn't matter to me when the Lord comes back, and I've got to stop thinking about how fast He's coming back. We're told to live as though it's a thief in the night, but because we think we have a short amount of time, it changes our strategy. And that shouldn't be changed. If the Lord comes back right now and screws up every plan I've got, that's really good. But in case He doesn't, I'm going to keep planning as though it may be 100 years, 200, 300 years. And so what happens is there are certain principles that are fairly timeless. Incrementalism is one of them. I marvel at the fact that back in the 1870s and 1880s, Robert Ingersoll, who was known as the national evangelist for atheism, Robert Ingersoll was derided by the public, by the media. Everybody said he's nuts. But he said, I've got this 80-year plan, and I know I'll be dead by the time it happens, but there's ways we can secularize education in America. And there's ways that we can move to graded education. There's ways we can move progressivism. And he laid out an 80-year plan. Man, we can't lay out an 80-day plan for most conservatives. And so we're always thinking about how short time is, and they never think that way. They're willing to say, because for them, they're here for however long they're here, and they're going to pass it on to the next generation through the same philosophy. So having said that, I think that in the Christian church, our eschatology has gotten in the way of how we look at things. Historically, this nation screwed up. You know what? It was screwed up in 1856. It was screwed up several other times as well. we're not yet at the point, we've not yet made it as bad as they've had it several other times in our own nation's history. We've always been able to come back, and even if I didn't have that example, how many times did Israel fall off the face of the map and God brought them back? I mean, they were terrible at what they did. They're sacrificing their kids, they're burning their kids, they're burning wives, and God still brings them back. So from my standpoint, it's not how much time we have, it's just I'm going to do it until I run out of time. And when I'm out of here, my kids are going to do it after me. I want to make sure they get trained to do it right. So that's the other side, is I wouldn't think in terms of how much time we have or don't have. I would think in terms of I'm going to outlast you. I'm going to make sure my philosophy is the last one standing. And if that takes 2,000 years, I'm going to do that. And again, if Christ comes back and screws up everything I've got planned, that's great. But if he doesn't, at least we will have something to pass on at that point in time. So I'm going to jump in the middle of theology there for a minute and back off. But I think we've got to change the way we think about it as conservatives, and particularly about people faith. It's not up to us when he comes back, and it doesn't matter. In the meantime, we've got to be faithful. And as he said, occupy till I come. And that means without end. Just keep going.
I'm sure glad you kicked me in here before I got here. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Clayton Trotter, and I am a professor in the College of Business Administration here at the University of Alaska, Anchorage.
He's a Texan, by the way.
And don't hold it against me, or him. I want to say two things, first of all, if you don't mind. First of all, the desire for knowledge and understanding and wisdom among Alaska students at the University of Alaska, Anchorage is commendable. They're some of the best students I've ever had, and I've been teaching for 24 years. Now, having said that, the level of knowledge about history, and certainly about Scripture among my students, kind of needs something, okay? I want those in this room, though. Here I am asking them questions. I apologize. I'm following you to be a professor, but I want to ask a question to the audience. How many of you are grandparents in here? Would you raise your hand? Okay. And I look around this room, and I don't see a whole lot of millennials. And so my question, I guess, is, how does a group like this reach out to the students I'm teaching at the university, and more importantly, to our own grandchildren? And then that's one question. And then the other question is, would you please explain to us how much money $19 trillion is? Those two questions. Thank you very much.
With regard to young people, young people are naturally idealistic. I think it's a tactical mistake for us as conservatives to make the argument, gee, you're liberal because you're young and stupid and idealistic. Just wait until you're 40 and super jaded, like us, and then you'll begin to see things our way. No, we actually need to tap into their idealism and make it work for us. We don't tend to do that. I also think that our culture has shifted, and it shifted, use the word duty. And duty is a word that should inspire and motivate people to be excited about it. Because in other words, it's my duty to my country, so I'm going to sign up for the Marines. I want duty, so to speak. We have raised a generation for which the term duty is a burden. The last thing you want is duties. You want rights, you don't want duties. So this has put things like the Ten Commandments. Founders supported all kinds of freedoms, but not for a moment did they support moral freedom. They believe that there's a moral order in the universe that's external to us, that makes claims on us, and our job is to live by the edicts of it. Whatever our theology, they agreed on morality. And so this is how people of different theology could come together because they had moral ground in common. I think what shifted since the 60s is this sort of, the young people are more emotional, they're more visual, they are more oriented to self-fulfillment. Now, ironically, this new medium of movies is tailor-made for them because when you think about it, the medium is very important. A book appeals to your brain. You read a book and you're reading it in a sense in your mind. If you see a play, it appeals to your ear. You're listening, and dialogue is the most important thing in a play because you can't change the scene that much. You can do a stage and then everyone talks for 2 hours. In a movie, it's your eyes, and your ears, and your head, and your heart. And a lot of conservative and Christian movies bomb because the people who make them are trying to do messaging. You actually got to make a movie on Obamacare. But nobody goes to the movie for messaging. People go to the movie for entertainment. And they go to the movie to be moved. They don't even want their character. People say, well, I'm writing a script. I want my character to experience love and excitement and this and that. But people go to the movies not so that the characters can experience those things, but so that they can experience those things. So to make a movie, you have to deliver what movies deliver. You have to deliver an emotional experience that moves somebody at the core. Now, if you do that, you can put in all kinds of messaging and people will happily digest it. So Hollywood knows that. And so they will do all kinds of messaging in their movies, but they understand the point of a movie. We need to understand the point of a movie and we'll make better movies. So you sometimes have to shift and speak to young people in their own language, and what I'm saying now is that their language is different. They're less likely to read a 300-page book, and they're more likely to want to go see a movie. Now, our people and our team kind of know this, but they think all kinds of rubbish around it. So I'll go see some CEO, or I'll say, look, would you like to help me get this movie to independent voters? And he'll say something preposterous like, Dinesh, nobody watches movies anymore. Young people aren't into movies. Can you reduce the concept of your movie to a 90-second video? And I say, no, I can't do that. An Indian guy is accusing the President of the United States of being an anti-colonialist. How can I put that in a 90-second video? Who's going to change their mind based on that? No. Now, I make 90-second videos. I call them trailers. You saw one of them. So the videos are important, but they drive people to the movie. People change. You can go to a movie and come out with a little different life experience than you went in. That's never true from a YouTube video. So if we're smart again about it, we will see that there are new mediums. They're not that hard to reach. They're all out there. They're easy to navigate. And so what I do is we're a team. We make these movies. We're about 10 of us. Most of these guys are in their 20s. But there are a couple of us old guys, and we basically run the show. But we tap their creativity, and we reach young people. And so young people aren't that hard to reach. You just have to figure out how to talk to them.
I was talking earlier about revivals, and everyone we've had, the reason you get such opposition from the religious community is revivals always do something new that people aren't used to. It's the opposition. We've never done it that way. We've always done it this way. And what you get is a conflict is this is how we've always done it. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm used to. And then here comes George Whitfield. He doesn't preach in churches anymore. He goes out in pastures and fields, and he gets people together that happen to like each other. And he gets denominations to cross lines and go out. Well, we've never done that before. And so he gets attacked mostly by the preachers. They would literally have their people from the church stand in the trees and pee on him. They would pelt him with all sorts of garbage and rocks and vegetables. And it was preachers doing that to Whitfield. I say that to say this. Jesus talked about how that there's old wineskins and new wineskins. And new wineskins come along, they're soft, they're flexible, and he said you can't pour new wine in old wineskins because they're so brittle, it'll bust the bag, and it's gone. And I say that because I have made a commitment. I'm going to be a new wineskin, and I'm going to figure out how things are done in the next generation. I may not be able to do it, but I'm going to understand it so that I don't reject how it's done. And that becomes real crucial if I'm going to connect with the next generation. For example, Chi Alpha, we had Chi Alpha mentioned here earlier, UAA, the group where all these kids are becoming Christians. Chi Alpha, I was speaking at their national thing recently, and they had done, and this is actually about 5 years ago, they had done a survey. They have 200 chapters on secular universities across America, these Christian kids, and they say, how do you want to be communicated with? And the top 8 ways that these kids want to be communicated with, the last on the list was email. And they said, we only use email with really old people. We can't even get the Republican Party to send emails out. They're still doing mail, snail mail. So, and now in the last 5 years, email will be about number 24 on the list. It's way the heck down there. So if you're going to connect, you have to be willing to be flexible. The other thing I found about millennials is they're relational. And if they find out you're genuine and true and willing to spend some time with them,
then it makes a lot of difference. The other thing that conservatives have a problem with, and in my generation, we had what we call the generation gap. You don't hear that now because they will cross the generational lines if you're genuine, if you have a relationship, if you talk to them honestly, listen to them, not just preach at them. The other problem that we as conservatives have is we've accumulated a lot of knowledge over however many years we've got. I've got some white hair, so I've had a few years, and we want to give it to them all in one sitting. And you cannot do that. You have to give it to them a little at a time. So when I speak at universities and law schools, I know what they've been taught, and I'll always pick 2 or 3 things that they think they know, and I'll just shoot those down. And I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to convert them to everything. All I've done is raise enough questions with them that they've seen that some of what they believe is not accurate, and so therefore they're a lot more open to saying, well, you know, how about this? And so it's a slow process. It's a relational process. And if you're looking to do something with that generation and mentoring, it's going to take time. It's going to take listening. It's going to take you not giving them the whole load at one shot. It's going to take little bite-sized stuff. We're told in Hebrews that, you know, there's eating meat, but there's also drinking milk. And these guys are going to be drinking milk for a long time. And you have to start it slow. So that's the other way that I have found you can touch millennials, bring them along. I have a lot of folks that millennials that we mentor, but it's a slow process.